join us for the next hour and to learn more about just the admission process in general.
So we have just a couple of housekeeping details, kind of regular Zoom rules. The Q&A feature is ready to go. And so if you all have questions as we're talking through the presentation tonight, please don't hesitate to add any questions to the Q&A feature. We have two incredible colleagues, Megan Borden from the University of Alabama and Madeline Ryan, who is at West Virginia University, who are actually answering all of those questions in that Q&A feature. And then we will also answer some questions at the end of our presentation tonight. So I think we are going to jump in, and we're trying to give you a little bit more of kind of that entry level view into college admissions and everything that you may need to know to really start your college search.
Yes, and so we want to just start off in talking about the concept of college fit, right? And about finding your fit. I know that for most of y'all, when you think about college, it might be overwhelming. And so we wanted to help kind of create a visual, but then also talk through all these different points that might identify, what your right fit college might look like, or what multiple schools that are good fits for you might look like, and kind of how to get there, right? So with over 5,000 colleges and universities in the US, you will absolutely find the right school for you. And all it's going to take is just kind of thinking critically about what you're looking for in an institution of higher ed, right? What do you want to do? What type of place do you want to be for the 4 years after high school? And so when we think about college fit and how to figure that out, there's a few different criteria that we recommend really thinking about and kind of exploring from your perspective and what you're looking for in your education as well as your experience throughout your college years. The first, I'm just going to start and kind of go around clockwise. So the first is location. And that'll include geographic location, right? Do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be in a college town? Do you want to be in a more rural environment? Is there an area of the United States or even the world that you have wanted to live in or attend school in? Do you want to be close to home? Do you want to go far away from home? Kind of what are your priorities when it comes to location? What are you looking for? What type of environment do you want to be in? Do you have any limitations there that you want to keep in mind, when thinking about what are colleges that you're going to apply for and what might the best college fit for you I think about, because from there, it's easy to then jump off and learn about different schools once you kind of narrow down the location or the geographic region you want to be in. The next thing is academic programs and the majors offered at a school, right? That is going to be a number one priority for a lot of students because you're getting this education to prepare you for your career. And so those academic programs, that major, that school that you want to be in, that's going to be something that should drive your college decision and your college list as well. Not to worry if you don't know what you want to do, if you know, hey, I'm not exactly sure if I want to be, a business major or a psychology major, but I know that I really love, the STEM fields, or I love writing and maybe journalism might fit. You can kind of use your strengths, your interests to kind of guide you in maybe choosing a handful of academic programs that you think might be a good fit for you down the road. And that can kind of help guide, what you're looking for at a college or at an institution. Another thing to think about is if you don't know yet, maybe you want to attend an institution that has that academic flexibility and gives you the option to kind of pick your major once you're in college and once you're on campus, rather than deciding that prior to going to college. The next thing to think about is size, right? So how big do you want your school to be? Are you looking for a really large environment where there's a lot of school spirit? Do you want a smaller, more close-knit kind of community and environment? Do you learn best in kind of a seminar style where there's a small amount of kids in the class, or are you okay with those larger lecture halls? Like that's going to be something that you should think about in regards to not only your learning style, but also what type of kind of community that you want around you. Next is going to be student life. And so thinking about things like activities you want to be involved in, athletics, if you want to, attend a school with a large athletics presence, what type of kind of student body you're looking for. If you are looking for a place that has lots of internships or research or career kind of counseling or career goals. If you're looking for a more residential experience where you live on campus and you have kind of that residential life in the dorms, or if you're okay with maybe commuting from home or living in an off-campus apartment and kind of having your own thing going there, all of those things will contribute into the student life section, and you can kind of pick and choose, what you feel would be the best fit for you. Next up, we have campus culture. And so some questions just to ask yourself might be similar to like student life and other aspects, but thinking about, are you someone who, do you thrive in a competitive environment? Or are you more collaborative? Are you someone who is looking for walk across and you saying hi to everyone? Or are you someone who would prefer to, kind of blend in with the crowd, or maybe have the opportunity to meet tons and tons of people over your 4 years? What is the feel on campus? Kind of what do you want the school to prioritize? All of those things might come into play when you're thinking about campus culture. Another thing might be the student support on campus, and kind of thinking about, what types of support exists? What are you looking for in a school? And what do different schools that you're considering offer you? The next aspect of kind of the college fit process to consider is the admission criteria, right? And so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the application, but just keeping in mind that admission criteria, the things that the different institutions are going to be looking for in their application process, and making sure that some of it aligns with what you have to offer. And then finally, cost. One of my colleagues recently said that college is like the only thing that you shop for backwards, in that you may not know the total cost that it will cost you and your family to attend an institution until after you've received information on scholarships and financial aid. But when thinking about your right college fit, you can think about, and you can start to look at different institutions and ask questions about what scholarships are available, what type of financial aid is available, how do you go about applying for those opportunities? If you didn't qualify for any of those opportunities, what would that total price be? Kind of thinking about what the cost might be for you and your family. And when you think of all of those different aspects, that will help you put together your college list, right? When you're thinking about what is the best fit institution for you, when you're coming up with your college list, you'll want to kind of prioritize schools into reach schools. So maybe those schools that might be a little bit out of reach for you, but you are really excited about, you really want to maybe go to or apply to. And then you'll have some match and some target schools. Those are schools that meet all of the criteria that you're looking for in an institution, but that also you and kind of your academic profile fits within their admission criteria. And then the likely schools are going to be those schools that you feel you have a good chance of being admitted to, you would be happy to attend. Maybe they're not, as exciting to you as those reach schools, but they're wonderful options that you also are really, really interested in. And then this is a list of all different resources and where you can find information to help you build your college list and help you find out all of those different aspects of kind of the college process, right? So first, on the left-hand side, you'll see some websites. There are so many college websites and college admission websites out there. One is niche.com, bigfuture.org, finaid.org. The financial aid aspect is going to be finaid.org, but the other two are going to give you basically information on all of those things, right? They're going to tell you a lot of different information on all the different schools that you might consider. Some of them have like reviews from current students and things like that if you want to learn more from actual students who go there. And so those can be really great tools, at least to even just begin your kind of college search process. Next, online platforms. These are typically platforms that your school or your school district might have an account with that you can use, right? So some schools will work with Naviance or SCORE or Maya Learning or some of the big ones. If you're not sure what your school has, you can always contact your school counselor and ask, hey, what platform do you guys use to find college information? Where can I go and look at that? Some of these are really great because not only do they have information about the institutions, but they'll also have information about students who applied to those institutions from your high school. And sometimes that can be helpful in kind of figuring out, oh, what types of students are going to these schools. And then people. This is definitely, we recommend reaching out to as many people as you can and using these individuals to help guide you throughout the process. The first is going to be your school counselor, your guidance counselor, or your college counselor at your high school. They're going to be a wealth of knowledge. They're also going to be the person who's working with you through your entire application process. Next is admission counselors. So people like Gail and I who work for an institution, a lot of times we will have what we call territories or geographic territories, where we work with students from specific areas or specific high schools. And so a lot of times, regardless of the institution, you'll have a point person or a point of contact at every school that you're looking for. Finally, alumni or current students, they can be great. They can give you tons of information about their experience at different institutions. And then finally, just school-specific things, right? So checking out school websites, looking at their social media. A lot of schools are, utilizing things like Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, and having a lot of information on there that you're able to access in order to learn more about the school. Finally, you can also visit campus. That is a really great way to get a feel for some of those more intangible aspects, such as campus culture and student life, is kind of actually seeing it in action, right? All right, so now I'm gonna hand it over to Gail to talk a little bit about the application process.
And Kendall, I have to ask, I mean, when students are building their college list, what do you think is sort of that ideal number of
I think it's going to depend. That is a question that I always get, that I'm like, oh, it really depends on the student. Yeah. I don't know, because I think it depends on the student. I think it depends on where you're applying. If you're applying to more selective institutions, you might have a bigger list, just because you know that those admission rates might be a little bit lower. If you know where you want to go and you are gung-ho about one school, then maybe you only apply to one and you get in, and it's I would recommend working with a school counselor to kind of build that list, to make sure that it's rounded out. But I would caution students not to go too overboard, because a lot of schools are going to require essays, and those things take time. And so I feel like there is a happy medium there. Gail, do you have any opinions or strong opinions on that matter?
I think you're giving really good advice. I do think that we want to make sure that students have options. So for most students, more than one, right? And I think usually that sweet spot is kind of in that 5 to 10 category. But just like you said, Kendall, it is going to change student to student. But I think that we want to make sure that you have some options to choose from. By the time April rolls around, you've got some places to go, and you get to make that hard choice. It's nice to have too many options to choose from. And so I think certainly that's kind of the goal at the end of this as well.
Yes. That is the best problem to have, right?
Yeah. So once you've built your college list and you have a little bit of an idea of where you're going to be applying, we kind of get into a little bit more of that process of the application altogether. There are 3 main deadlines that you are likely going to encounter as we are looking at different applications. And this is where things start to vary a little bit, school to school. You are going to see some differences institution to institution, but the overall heading and kind of definition of each of these deadlines tends to be the same. So we're going to see early decision, which is a binding decision. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Usually these applications are due as early as about October 15th, maybe as late as December 1st, but usually early in the fall. Early action is non-binding. And again, I promise I will talk about that in a moment. And usually those applications are due kind of that November, December timeframe of a student's senior year. And then regular decision, the deadline could be as early as December, but typically is a little bit more in that January, February timeframe, sometimes as late as March. So again, it does depend just a little bit on the institution. So let's dive into each of these and get a little bit deeper. So early decision, Kendall was referring to a moment ago, that knows exactly precisely where they are wanting to go. They have done their research. This is going to be a perfect match for them. They know that it is a school that offers the program they're wanting to pursue. It's going to be a good match academically and socially and everything else. The binding nature of early decision does indeed mean that a student is applying to only one school early decision. So you cannot apply to multiple schools early decision. It's only one. And if that school does offer the student admission, you as a student are saying, I'm coming. And so at that point, if you do gain an acceptance, you are withdrawing any other applications that you may have at other schools at that point, and you will submit your enrollment deposit to that particular institution. So the question, I think, for a lot of students is, okay, why do you want to do early decision? And there sometimes can be a perk. Typically, it is going to be a little bit earlier in the process. And so if you are a type A planner, and there's nothing wrong with that because I may be that too, then it is kind of in your best interest to finalize that decision a little bit earlier and really be able to concentrate on your senior year. The other perk for many institutions, though not all, is that you may see that there is a slightly higher acceptance rate for students that are applying under an early decision deadline rather than an early action or a regular decision. So if you were looking at really selective institutions, you may see just a little bit of a difference between their early decision pool versus a later pool. Early action, on the other hand, is non-binding. So you do not have that restriction of only applying to one school. You can apply to as many institutions early action as you would like to. And while you are going to receive your answer from the institution a little bit earlier, you don't have to let the school know until May 1. So I often think about this as really kind of an opportunity to shop around just a little bit. You'll receive your acceptances, you'll receive your financial aid offers, and you really get to compare things kind of side by side. And so if you are wanting to comparison shop, this may be a really good option for you. Again, the bulk of the application process will be happening in the fall of your senior year. And then you have a little bit more time to visit again, to make sure that you have the financial aid information in hand and those kinds of things. And so it really does give you just kind of the best of both worlds. The last decision would be regular decision. And this is really the most common option for most four-year colleges and universities. Again, remember that the deadline is going to be a little bit later. So you may have a little more time in which to submit your application and get all of those pieces of information in. But you are also going to hear back a little bit later. And so for very selective institutions, usually they will notify students by April 1st. And then in turn, you have that your decision will be. So you're kind of crunching the time from when you have the decisions in hand to when you need to make your final choice for a college choice as well. So it's typically about a month in there. So if you would like to extend that time, to make that decision, early action might be a good option, but not all schools offer early action. And so regular decision is the non-binding decision for many institutions as well. So I think, Kendall, we can probably head over to the notification, which is sort of that other side of this as well. Do you want to go ahead and jump in here?
Absolutely. So when we think about notification, that's when you are notified of your admission decision, right? And so this can differ from school to school. This can also be somewhat reliant on those application deadlines, but it also may not be. And so the first process is kind of whether a school has rolling admission or deadline-driven admission. Kind of what Gail just talked about in all these different application rounds, most of those are deadline-driven admission, right? Because they typically will have a deadline that students have to submit their materials by, and then they'll also have a date on which students receive their admission decisions. And I'll tell you a little bit more about rolling admission. The next that we have is open or selective. Open admissions versus selective admissions also kind of work in different ways and are kind of the opposite of each other that I'll speak about in a minute as well. And then the last type of kind of notification difference or process regarding applications is holistic or assured. Sometimes assured might be called automatic admission. But basically the main difference with that is Holistic admission usually means that an institution is going to review your entire application before making an admission decision, and so they typically will not have kind of required metrics or ways for a student to know 100% whether they are admitted or not. Whereas assured or automatic admission may have specific parameters, whether it's related to class rank or test score or GPA, where students can basically know, yes, I hit these different criterias. I am, going to be admitted to this institution based off of the criteria that they have in order to gain automatic or assured admission. And so when we think about the first one, rolling admission, this is something that's pretty common at like larger public or state universities where they receive loads and loads and loads of applications. Rolling basically means that applications are read and reviewed by admissions staff as they are submitted. And so students will receive notification on a rolling basis, right? And so this means that if you apply early, you're going to receive your admission decision earlier. Typically, these schools are offering admission on a first come, first served basis. And so if you submit that application earlier, you may have a better chance of being admitted. Not always, but that is kind of sometimes how it works. And there's typically a shorter window in when you're receiving that admission decision, right? It might be a few weeks versus kind of waiting a longer amount of time if you do a more deadline-driven plan. And then open admissions is more common with like community colleges, kind of local schools, as well as online or distance learning types of higher education. And so this is where most students who apply for admission are going to be granted admission, and where it typically also may happen on a rolling basis as well, or it may happen from semester to semester or year to year, kind of depending on what the program is. And so this might mean for some community colleges, it might mean that, as long as you have a high school diploma or a GED, you are able to begin taking classes with not a lot of wait time, with not a extensive admission process that you need to go through. And so it could be a really great option for students who might have a lower than average GPA at their high school. It's also a great plan for students who may want to attend a 2-year institution and then transfer to a 4-year institution. Sometimes students also take advantage of open admission, if they're just wanting to take some classes like in the summer prior to going to their 4-year institution as well. And then selective admission, basically that means that these are the institutions who are typically using that holistic admission process because they may accept a fraction of the applicants that they have each year. And so a lot of times in selective admissions, it is not assured or automatic. It is that holistic process where applicants need to kind of exhibit things that the school is looking for. And so that might mean outstanding academic profiles. It might mean specific personality characteristics or interests in line with the university. And all of those things will come through in the application related to their academics or their activities, their essays, things like that. And just to give you like some perspective, when you think about selective admissions, like I mentioned earlier, there's 5,000 colleges or universities in the United States. About half of those are going to be those 4-year kind of accredited institutions that you traditionally think of, in America when we say college. But of those, only around 13-ish% accept fewer than half their applicants. And so there's a very, very wide variety. I think it's about 100 that will admit even fewer than 25% of their applicants. And so when you think of, selective, that's also a gradient, right? Of where there are very, very highly selective institutions that are admitting, fewer than 10% of their applicants. That's going to be only a handful of schools. Whereas there's a lot more that will accept more than half of their applicants as well. And so there is a gradient in terms of selectivity and how kind of every school determines their selectivity will depend on things like their applicant pool, the size of the school, kind of whether they're able to, increase enrollment, whether it's a residential school, kind of all these different factors will play into that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times too with the selective admissions, we are trying to find what works best for the student and what works best for the institution.
Yes.
So it goes hand in hand, right, Kendall?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I think we're going to jump into looking at some different types of applications as well. So now that we kind of know when to apply and also some basic admission, I guess, definitions, let's talk about the applications that we may actually encounter along the way. There's 4 main types that you will probably run into. There will be an institutional application that many schools will offer, and it is exactly as it sounds. It is specific to that school. And so in those cases, if you were applying to that particular university, you will not be able to use that application for any other school. Many times I think schools will use institutional applications when they are trying to gather particular details that maybe aren't necessarily going to be gathered in some of the other applications. The other major 3 would be Apply Texas, the Common Application, and the Coalition Application. And I'll speak a little bit more about each of those in that order as well. So the Apply Texas application is indeed specific to Texas, right? So all of the public schools in Texas will accept the Apply Texas application, and nearly all of the private schools in Texas will also accept the Apply Texas application. So if in building your college list, you have all Texas schools listed, this may be a really good option for you. And I think both Kendall and I probably agree with working smarter and not harder. You all need to use the application that makes the most sense for you. When schools are actually deciding which of these applications to accept, we actually will make the commitment to not prioritize one application over another. So it's really not an institutional preference, it's a student preference as to which application is going to work best for you. There are some differences between the applications, and I think one of the wanted to go ahead and just pull those essay topics from those 3 applications and provide those for you all as well. For Apply Texas, there are 3 essay topics. Usually the school will tell you which of these topics to answer. And so a school might say, we want topic A, or we want topic B, or sometimes we want A and B or C. And so there will be some designation from the schools as to which of these topics you may need to answer. Now, the common application of the applications that we're talking about is by far the most common. There are about 900 member institutions across the U.S., and I think about 60 international schools now. So, we're kind of climbing up to that. Nearly 1,000 schools will take the common application. So again, this is going to be an institution that may best serve you if you are casting your college net rather wide. I would say that the majority of the institutions that are on the common application are private schools, though there are many public schools that are also on Common App. And so just know, again, it is not exclusively for private schools. With the common application, there are actually 7 prompts. And I know that obviously we have gotten to find some very small text here. So I'm just going to pull out one of those prompts. The last one truly lets you write about anything that you'd like. And so that prompt number 7 is an essay topic of your choice. You are going to see a little bit of familiarity though in each of these prompts. There is a little bit of overlap with some of the other essays and the other applications. And so, not breaking any trade secrets here, you probably can get away with one essay for multiple applications with a little bit of tweaking. And so that is certainly allowed as well. Now, the last of the applications is the coalition application. The coalition application is comprised of about 200 schools nationwide. They're only in the US, no international institutions right now. And these are all schools that are really committed to supporting underrepresented students in higher education. So these are institutions that have really kind of been bound together to make sure that they are supporting students within really high graduation, 4-year graduation rates, but then also through funding policies. And so it's a little bit more of a common mission there. there are 5 topics for the coalition application. And again, you'll love that number 5, essay of your choice. And so again, you really can reuse those essays if you are needing to do so. Now, with each of these applications, there may be a little bit of variation school to school, and Kendall's really going to kind of dissect that application criteria in just a second. But as a quick note before she does so, there may be a supplemental part particular institution. Many times, if you do encounter a school that requires a supplemental part of that application, it usually is a, why are you applying to this university? And not exclusively, but that is a pretty typical question to be able to answer for those, or why are you applying to this particular major? And so really it's to kind of dig in just a little bit to see if you have done your research. So know that even in addition to the application itself, there might be some additional parts that you'd need to submit. I think Kendall is going to now address a little bit more of that admission criteria, looking both at kind of that perspective of holistic admission and pointing out when that it pertains to a student's application, and then also assured admissions.
Yes, and so before I jump in, we did have a question come through about automatic admission and kind of how students go about applying for that. Would you like to talk a little bit about in terms of if they need to submit an application, and if so, is there any specific requirements in order to submit that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think sometimes with automatic admissions, we make the assumption that if we meet that particular standard, we're in, we're done, good to go, right? But the fact of the matter is you still have to complete the application. So with many institutions, the application itself is one portion of the overall application file. You likely will also need to still submit a transcript, especially for automatic admissions, because we need to make sure that the standard that we have set as an institution, that your transcript actually reflects that. If testing is part of that automatic admission standard, then again, you will need to supply test scores, whether they be self-reported, which means you are reporting your scores, or if they are official. Schools will actually determine which ones they want to see, and I'm sure Kendall will probably go into that in just a second, but you do still need to complete the application. And so for some institutions, it may not be that an essay is required, but other parts of the application are. For other institutions, everything is still required. And so it's really important to look at the deadlines and the requirements and to hit both of those in order to be fully considered for automatic admission. Anything that you would add there, Kendall?
I would just say, and if you're wondering specifically about an institution, absolutely reach out to their admission office and ask, right? If you are wondering, what application do I need to submit? What specific materials are needed? If I think I, fall within the automatic admission criteria, definitely reach out to that admission office or your admission counselor at that institution, and they can kind of guide you through that process as well and let you know, hey, this is exactly what you need to submit in order to
I think that's good advice. We want to talk to you, right?
Yes. We want to make sure all of your questions are answered, right? All right. And so I'm going to jump into admission criteria and kind of talk about all the different aspects that might be included in your application, depending on which institution you are applying to and how their application process works. And so we're going to start off with objective criteria. And so we're using the word objective to really mean the criteria that's kind of the numeric based. A lot of times it is the things that you have been working towards throughout all 4 years of high school that you have accomplished so far, right? So things like your academic record. When I should mention that objective criteria may be used for both holistic or automatic or assured admission. A lot of times it is going to be used in both of those aspects. And so first off, we have your academic record, right? The accomplishments that you have had throughout high school, the hard work that you've put in and day out throughout school for the past 4 years. Elements that may be considered within the application process or within your application itself that relate to the academic record might be the rigor of your coursework. So things like, have you challenged yourself? Have you taken rigorous classes? Have you kind of gone above and beyond and taken classes that are interesting to you, but that also, show that you are putting in that effort? Sometimes this might be an AP class, an IB class, a dual credit class. It might be, not just taking 2 years of a foreign language, but doing 4 years. That rigor of coursework is going to look different from institution to institution and kind of what they're looking for, but often it means, has the student challenged themselves throughout high school? Next is going to be the context of your school environment. Yeah, I'm going to just run through these and then I'll jump to the next slide. But so the context of your school environment, right? Admission counselors, the ones who are reading your applications, are going to be familiar with your high school and are going to know kind of what is offered at your high school, what type of environment that you're in. And so we'll be able to understand, certain nuances about your high school and what's available to you, and kind of how the academic process works. We're also going to look at your coursework, so what specific classes that you've taken throughout your 4 years, your grades, your GPA. Depending on the school, they may look at GPA differently. Some schools are going to use a weighted version, some are going to use an unweighted version. Some may recalculate your GPA onto that unweighted version, that unweighted 4.0 GPA scale. Some may recalculate using every single class that you've ever taken. Others may only focus on your core academic classes, is physical education or ceramics or religious courses from your total GPA calculation. Another thing that we're going to consider is your trend in grades. Have you maintained consistent grades throughout all 4 years? Have you had a dip here or there? If you did have lower grades one semester, were you able to bring them up the next semester? Kind of things like that, and just evaluating how your academic performance has done. And the one thing that you can potentially think about is if you have any concern in or your grade trend or anything, you can share that in your application with admission officers so that they can kind of hear any reasoning that you might have about different things in your application. And so another objective criteria is going to be standardized test scores. And so this past year, obviously, with a global pandemic and limited testing across the globe, really, most colleges and universities became test optional, at least for the last admission cycle. And many of them are also staying test optional for this upcoming admission cycle. So for any of you who are rising seniors this year, that means that at a lot of institutions, you may have the option as to whether to submit standardized test scores or whether not to submit them. Again, this is something you want to ask the different institutions. A lot of them will have that on their website, but again, you can also ask. And test basically means that students can apply with test scores or without test scores. How institutions utilize that information may differ from school to school. And so that's a question that you may want to ask in kind of making that decision. There's also a process called test blind, which some schools may have test blind admission also, which basically means they do not consider test scores at all in their application review or their admission process. Many test optional schools will consider them if you submit them, but will not consider them if you do not submit them. And so they kind of just add another factor, another piece of information in the admission process if you submit them. However, some automatic or assured admission processes may have different kind of criteria or requirements if you do not submit a test score. And so definitely recommend checking with the specific institution you're interested in. Other things to think about when you think about the SAT or ACT is a school's middle 50% test score range. A lot of schools will have this available on their admission website or in like an admission presentation that they give. That can give you an idea of where, if you choose to submit test scores and you've taken the SAT or ACT, kind of where you fall within the average test score range at that. Whether a school super scores the SAT or ACT. Super scoring basically means they are going to take the highest score that you received on each category of either the SAT or each category of the ACT, and kind of create, again, this super score, right? This awesome score that is the sum of all your highest scores of all, the testing dates or the testing times that you've taken that specific test. Some schools will super score for you automatically. Others, might require you to send that. Others may say we don't super score at all. We only look at, the specific score that you received on a certain date. And then minimum scores required. That is a great question to ask. A lot of times that is going to be a question that you want to ask to those institutions that might have that assured or automatic admission criteria, where test scores do play a big aspect in kind of whether you are granted that automatic admission. Awesome. And so moving on from that objective criteria now to the subjective side. Typically, this is going to be information that's used in that holistic admission process. So when a student is going through a holistic admission, we're not only using that objective criteria, those academic aspects, but we're also considering the kind of more subjective, personal characteristics that come through in the application through things like your essay, right? Not only will your application essay provide a writing sample for the institution where we can kind of see your writing ability, but we're also going to be able to learn more about you. Your personality will shine through, the things that are important to you will come through in that essay, your personal experiences, your values, your whether you're funny, whether you're serious, whether whatever you decide to write about. Of all of that huge, those huge lists that Gail showed you earlier of all the essay prompts, whatever you write about, that is an opportunity for us to learn something about you that isn't already in your application. And so when a lot of students like to ask, like, oh, how do I make myself stand out in the application process, right? The essay is a way for you to do that. It's to help us learn about you and who you are. Another way that we learn about you through the subjective criteria is going to be through your extracurricular activities. When we look at your extracurricular activities, we're going to be looking for a lot of great things like leadership, your dedication to these different interests, whether you've grown in these activities, if you've gained, responsibility, or you've exhibited responsibility, depending on what you've been involved in. And so some things to think about is definitely get involved at your high school. We want to see that you are doing something with your time other than just school, right? We want to see that you are engaged, that you are connected, or even outside of high school. You can do things kind of within school organizations or school clubs, or outside of your school, such as a part-time job, your own initiatives, projects, classes, things like that. And so a good thing to remember is there is no magic list, right? There's nothing that's going to guarantee you admission anywhere. And then there's also certain things that aren't going to prohibit you from gaining admission somewhere. We're really just hoping to learn about you, and we want you to follow your passions and really do what you love to do throughout high school. And then kind of one of the last two elements of subjective criteria that we're going to consider are your recommendation letters. This is going to help us get to know you and who you are in the classroom, as well as who you are in the school environment. A lot of institutions will require a counselor letter and a teacher recommendation letter. So definitely think about, which teachers you want to ask for that. We recommend, choosing a teacher who likes you, who you have a good relationship with, who you feel like knows you pretty well and is able to talk about, who you are not only in the classroom, but maybe outside of the classroom as well. Sometimes it's recommended to choose a teacher from an area of study that you want to go into. So if you're looking to be an engineer, a math teacher might be a good pick there. If you want to do journalism, an English teacher might be a good pick. And ask them early. Do not wait until a week before the application date, because chances are other students are asking them as well, right? And so you want to make sure that you go ahead and you ask them as early as you know that you want to apply to this institution and you want to get them to recommend you. One last thing, we are going to look for quality over quantity, right? You don't need to go overboard and send us 10 rec letters. Really, I would stick to kind of what the school is recommending and what they're looking for, and making sure that, again, those rec letters are strong, so that way you don't need to send 8 of them in order for us to get a feel for who you All right, and the last aspect of subjective criteria is demonstrated interest. This is a concept that's going to vary from school to school, and whether, some schools are going to look for this, some schools are not going to look for this at all. Demonstrated interest just basically means that the student has demonstrated an interest in that institution in one way or another. Some ways that students can demonstrate their interest in a school is by doing an interview, if the school offers that, is visiting campus and doing a campus tour, certain things like interaction with the admission counselors or the school, inquiry card submission. So these are kind of little cards that you might find at a college fair table. This might be a link to a form that you fill out, during a visit or something like that. Another way to demonstrate your interest is through early decision. And so that higher just because they know the students are extremely interested in that institution. And last but not least is your supplemental essay, right? Gail touched on this a little bit, but that why do you want to go to this institution? That a lot of times is going to be kind of the best way to demonstrate your interest if you're able to really explain why you are interested in a specific institution and go into detail about that, as well as relate it to yourself and talk about how, this institution fits some of your needs and will help you achieve your goals. That's going to be really convincing to an admission committee when we try to envision you on our campus. And I think that's it for the criteria. Gail, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what the timeline would look like?
Absolutely. I think Kendall and I wanted to be able to provide some practical next steps, right? And so we are kind of right in that time frame. I suppose truly we should move the star over to June. We are technically in June now. But we are in that process in which we should try to utilize our summer to the best of our abilities. I think that this is a really fantastic time to start drafting that essay, really plan which applications you're going to be submitting and which schools you're going to be submitting to. Make a spreadsheet or create a Google Calendar, share it with parents if you need to, just to keep kind of everybody on that same track as well. But I think that using that time frame before your senior year, knowing that all of your classes are about to kick in, we really want to be able to kind of maximize that time. So this is a great time, again, to narrow down that college list, make sure that you've signed up for SAT, ACT exams, those kinds of things, and go ahead and start asking for those letters of recommendation. So I'm going to double down on what Kendall said about asking early. Your recommenders will appreciate it. We do want to make sure that you all have plenty of resources to use throughout this college process. Kendall and I are two of the kind of the vast number of resources that are available to you, but we wanted to make sure that we were sharing our emails so that we could answer any other questions at this time. We are going to kind of wrap up the formal part of our presentation, but again, welcome you to add in any questions to that Q&A. The other resource that I wanted to make sure that everyone has available to them is the